The auction block stood cold and cruel in the winter wind, and Beatrice Langford felt the snowflakes gathering in her dark hair like a mockery of a bridal veil, as men shouted numbers that measured her worth in dollars and cents. She kept her chin high despite the iron weight of humiliation pressing down on her shoulders, despite the way her threadbare dress did nothing to shield her from the December cold that swept through Concordia, Kansas on this bitter day in 1867. Her father's debts had brought her here, his gambling and drinking finally catching up to him in the worst way possible. And now she stood on this platform while rough men evaluated her like livestock, their eyes calculating and cold. $50, called a merchant with tobacco-stained teeth. 60, countered a farmer whose hands looked like they knew how to inflict pain. Beatrice closed her eyes, trying to transport herself somewhere else, anywhere else. She was 21 years old and had spent her whole life in this town, had taught children their letters in the small schoolhouse, had tended her mother's grave with wildflowers every Sunday. Now she was being sold to settle debts she had not incurred, debts that existed because her father could not stay away from cards and whiskey. $75, said a voice that made her stomach turn, belonging to Silas Crane, a man known for working his servants until they dropped, and for the bruises his last housekeeper had worn before she disappeared. The auctioneer, a weasel-faced man named Polk, raised his gavel. 75 going once, going twice, $500. The voice cut through the winter air like a knife through silk, deep and steady and utterly confident. Every head turned, including Beatrice's. Through the swirling snow, she saw him, a cowboy sitting atop a massive gray horse, his hat pulled low but not low enough to hide the sharp angles of his face or the intensity of his gaze. He was tall even sitting down, broad-shouldered beneath a heavy coat, and something about the way he held himself suggested a man who did not make empty statements. Polk's eyes went wide. "Did you say 500, sir?" "I did." The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with authority. As he approached, Beatrice could see he was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. A scar ran along his jaw, giving him a dangerous look, but his expression held something she had not seen in any other man's face today, recognition of her humanity. "That's rather excessive for a debt servant, Mr. York. Raleigh York." The cowboy pulled a thick fold of bills from his coat. "And I know what I am willing to pay. Do we have an agreement, or shall I take my money elsewhere?" The crowd had gone silent, everyone watching this unexpected development. Silas Crane looked furious, his face reddening with anger and perhaps embarrassment. Polk counted the money with shaking fingers, greed winning out over his confusion. "Sold to Mr. York," he declared, bringing the gavel down with a sharp crack. Raleigh York climbed the auction block steps, his eyes never leaving Beatrice's face. Up close, she could see the weariness in his features, the dust of long travel on his clothes, but also something else, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. "Can you ride, miss?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she managed, her voice hoarse from cold and shock. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and draped it around her shoulders before she could protest. The warmth of it, still holding his body heat, made her want to weep with relief. He guided her down the steps with a hand at her elbow, respectful and careful, then lifted her onto his horse as though she weighed nothing at all. "Wait just a minute." Silas Crane pushed through the crowd, his face twisted with anger. "What's your game, York?" "Nobody pays that kind of money for a debt servant unless they are planning something. Maybe the sheriff should know about this." Raleigh turned slowly, and something in his movement made Crane take an involuntary step backward. My business is my own. The transaction was legal and witnessed. If you have concerns, take them up with the law, but do not stand in my way." There was steel beneath those words, a warning that even a fool could not miss. Crane's bluster deflated slightly, though his eyes remained hostile. Raleigh swung up behind Beatrice, gathering the reins with easy confidence. "Hold on," he said to her quietly, and then they were moving, the horse's powerful stride carrying them away from the auction block, away from the crowd, away from the worst moment of Beatrice's life. They rode in silence through the snowy streets of Concordia. Beatrice was acutely aware of the solid warmth of Raleigh behind her, the way his arms bracketed her body as he controlled the horse. She pulled his coat tighter around herself, breathing in the scent of leather and sage and something indefinably masculine. "Where are we going?" she finally asked as they passed the last buildings of town and headed into open country. "My ranch. About an hour's ride north." He paused. "I know you must have questions." "Why did you do that?" The question burst from her, urgent and confused. "Why would you pay so much?" She felt him take a breath, felt the rise and fall of his chest against her back. 3 years ago, I was in a tight spot in Colorado. A man had accused me of cheating at cards, which I had not done. His friends were ready to string me up without a trial. A woman named Margaret Langford happened to be passing by, and she stood up for me. Told them she had been in the saloon and seen the whole game, that I had played fair and the accuser was the real cheat. She did not know me from Adam, but she told the truth when it would have been safer to walk away. Beatrice's breath caught. "My mother. You knew my mother." "I did not know her name until today when I heard Polk announce yours. Langford is not such a common name. When I saw you standing there with snow in your hair, looking so much like her, I knew. She saved my life, Miss Langford. The least I could do was save you from a fate worse than death." Tears burned in Beatrice's eyes, freezing on her cheeks almost as soon as they fell. Her mother had died 2 years ago of fever, and her father had gone to pieces after that, drinking and gambling away everything they had. To know that even now, even gone, her mother's kindness had somehow reached out to protect her daughter made something break open in Beatrice's chest. "She was a good woman," Beatrice whispered. "The best, I am sure." His voice was gentle. "And I suspect her daughter is cut from the same cloth." They rode on through the snow-covered prairie, and gradually Beatrice felt something loosening in her chest. The tight knot of fear that had been choking her since her father had signed the papers putting her up for auction. This man, this stranger who was no longer quite a stranger, had pulled her out of hell. She did not know what awaited her at his ranch, what he might expect in return for his incredible generosity, but something told her he was not like Silas Crane. Something in the careful way he handled her, the respect in his voice, suggested a man of honor. The York ranch appeared gradually through the snow, starting with miles of good fence line and cattle bearing a simple Y brand. Then came outbuildings, a large barn, a bunkhouse with smoke rising from its chimney, and finally the ranch house itself, a solid 2-story structure built of good timber and stone. It was not fancy, but it looked well-maintained and prosperous, the kind of place a man built when he intended to stay. Raleigh guided the horse to the front porch and dismounted, then reached up to help Beatrice down. Her legs were stiff from the cold and the ride, and she stumbled slightly. He caught her with steady hands. "Easy. Let us get you inside where it is warm." The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a weathered man with gray in his beard and sharp, intelligent eyes. "About time you got back, Raleigh. I was starting to worry. And who is this young lady?" "Beatrice Langford. This is Ezra Clark, my foreman and the closest thing I have to family." "Ezra, Miss Langford will be staying with us." Can you make sure the guest room is prepared and the fire built up?" Ezra's eyes moved between them, clearly noting Beatrice's worn dress and the way she was swimming in Raleigh's coat, but he was too tactful to ask questions. "Of course. Come in, miss, before you freeze solid. I will put coffee on." The inside of the ranch house was blessedly warm, heat radiating from a large stone fireplace in the main room. The furniture was simple but well made, everything clean and orderly. Beatrice stood dripping snow onto the floorboards, feeling awkward and displaced. Raleigh hung his hat on a peg by the door and ran a hand through his dark hair. "Miss Langford, please sit. You must be exhausted." "I do not understand what is happening." Beatrice remained standing, needing answers more than comfort. "You paid $500 for me. What do you expect in return?" He met her gaze steadily. "Nothing you are not willing to give. I told you I owed your mother a debt. Consider it repaid." $500 is considerably more than a debt of gratitude," she said carefully. "A man does not part with that kind of money for no reason." A faint smile crossed his face, though it held more sadness than amusement. "You are right to be cautious. God knows what you have been through. But I swear to you, Miss Langford, I expect no service from you, no labor, and certainly nothing of a personal nature unless you choose to offer it freely. I have a housekeeper who comes in from town 3 times a week. You are welcome to help her if you wish to feel useful, but it is not required. You are a guest here, not a servant." "That makes no sense," Beatrice said, frustration bleeding into her voice. "People do not do such things. Some people do not. I do." Raleigh moved to the fireplace, adding another log. "My parents died when I was 15, Miss Langford. Cholera. I ended up on my own, working any job I could find, sleeping rough more nights than not. I know what it is to be powerless and afraid. When I finally made something of myself, I promised I would use what I had to help others when I could. Your mother gave me a second chance at life. I am giving you the same." Ezra returned carrying a tray with 3 steaming cups of coffee. "Guest room is ready. Put fresh linens on the bed this morning, as it happens, and the fire is going strong." Beatrice accepted a cup with trembling hands, the warmth seeping into her frozen fingers. She sipped carefully, the hot liquid spreading warmth through her body. These 2 men were treating her with more kindness than she had experienced in months, since before her mother died, since before her father started his descent into destruction. "I do not know how to thank you," she said finally, looking at Raleigh. "I was so frightened." His expression softened. "You do not need to thank me. Just rest and recover. We can discuss the future when you are ready." Over the following days, Beatrice slowly began to believe that Raleigh York meant what he said. He did not come to her room at night. He did not demand anything from her. He was polite and respectful, treating her as he might treat a sister or a friend's daughter visiting for a time. Ezra was equally kind, fatherly in his concern for her well-being. The housekeeper, a stout German woman named Frieda, welcomed Beatrice's help but did not expect it and clucked over her thinness, insisting she eat more at every meal. The ranch itself was impressive. Raleigh ran about 300 head of cattle and bred horses that had a reputation for quality throughout Kansas and into Missouri. He employed 6 ranch hands in addition to Ezra, and treated them all fairly, paying decent wages and providing good food and accommodation. Beatrice watched him work, watched the way the men respected him, the way he handled the animals with firm gentleness, and slowly something began to shift inside her. She had been so focused on survival, on fear, that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply observe the world around her. Now, safe and warm and fed, she found herself noticing things. The way Raleigh's face relaxed when he worked with the horses, the deep, genuine laugh he had when Ezra told a joke at dinner. The careful way he wiped his boots before coming inside, respecting Frietta's clean floors. The far-off look he sometimes got in the evenings, staring into the fire as though seeing ghosts. A week after her arrival, Beatrice woke to find the snow had stopped and the sun was shining brilliant and cold over the white landscape. She dressed in one of the simple dresses Frietta had helped her make from fabric Raleigh purchased in town, this one a soft blue wool, and went downstairs to find Raleigh in the kitchen drinking coffee. "Good morning," he said, standing politely as she entered. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in a long time." She poured herself coffee from the pot on the stove. "Mr. York, I need to talk to you about my situation." He gestured to the table and they both sat. Morning light streamed through the window, turning his gray eyes silver. "What is on your mind?" "I cannot simply stay here indefinitely as your guest, eating your food and contributing nothing. It is not right. I want to work for my keep." "Miss Langford, please." She held up a hand. "I understand you meant kindness and I am grateful beyond words, but I need purpose. I was a school teacher before my father's debts caught up with us. I am educated and capable. Let me earn my place here." He studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "What would you propose? I noticed you have books in your study, many books, but no organization to them, no system. Let me catalog your library, create an inventory, and I know you handle all your ranch accounts yourself. I could help with bookkeeping, correspondence, anything that needs doing. I promise I am good with figures and writing." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You are good with figures. My mother insisted I receive a full education. Mathematics, literature, history, Latin. She believed women should be just as educated as men. Your mother was a wise woman in addition to being a brave one." Raleigh took a sip of his coffee. "Very well, Miss Langford. If it will make you feel better to work, I will accept your help. But not because you owe me anything. Because I genuinely could use the assistance and because I believe honest work is good for the soul." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you. On one condition." She tensed slightly. "What condition? You call me Raleigh. All this Mr. York business makes me feel ancient." Laughter bubbled up unexpectedly, the first real laugh she had experienced in longer than she could remember. "Only if you call me Beatrice." "Agreed." He stood, carrying his cup to the sink. "I need to ride out to the north pasture today to check on the herd. Would you like to come along? The fresh air might do you good and you can see more of the ranch." Beatrice hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I would like that." They rode out an hour later, Beatrice on a gentle sorrel mare named Molly, Raleigh on his big gray gelding. The snow made everything look clean and new, the prairie stretching endlessly in all directions beneath a blue sky. Beatrice had lived in Kansas all her life, but had rarely ventured far from Concordia. Out here, with the wind in her face and the sun warming her back, she felt something loosening inside her, some tightly wound spring finally beginning to relax. Raleigh was a good companion, pointing out features of the landscape, explaining his plans for the ranch, answering her questions about cattle and horses and the business of ranching. He spoke to her as an equal, never condescending, genuinely interested when she offered observations or asked about something that puzzled her. They found the herd scattered across a wide valley, dark shapes against the white snow. Two of Raleigh's men were there, checking the cattle, making sure none were in distress from the cold. They greeted their boss with easy respect and tipped their hats to Beatrice. "Everything looked good, Charlie?" Raleigh asked. "Yes, sir." "Lost 2 to the cold, but that is not bad considering the drop in temperature. The rest are hardy." They spent another hour riding the edges of the herd, and by the time they turned back toward the ranch house, Beatrice's cheeks were flushed with cold and her spirits higher than they had been in months. She felt alive in a way she had forgotten was possible. "Thank you for bringing me today," she said as the ranch buildings came into view. "Thank you for coming." Raleigh's voice was warm. It was pleasant having company. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Beatrice spent her mornings working in Raleigh's study, organizing his impressive collection of books, sorting through his business papers, catching up on correspondence that had languished. She discovered he was surprisingly well-read for a rancher, with books on everything from agricultural techniques to philosophy to poetry. His ranch accounts were meticulous, but could benefit from a better organizational system, which she implemented with quiet efficiency. In the afternoons, she often rode out with him, learning more about the ranch and the land. Other times she helped Frieda with household tasks or simply read by the fire. The evenings were her favorite, though. That was when she and Raleigh would talk. Long, rambling conversations over dinner or coffee, discussing books they had read, places they had been, dreams they harbored. She learned that he had built the ranch from nothing, working as a cowhand for years to save enough money to buy his first 100 acres and a dozen head of cattle. That had been 6 years ago. Through hard work, smart decisions, and not a little luck, he had expanded until the York Ranch was one of the most successful in the county. "What made you choose Kansas?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fire, the wind howling outside. "Opportunity." He stared into the flames, his profile sharp in the firelight. "After your mother saved me in Colorado, I drifted for a while working ranches, learning everything I could. I knew I wanted land of my own someday, but land is expensive and harder to come by each year. Kansas was opening up and the price was right, so I came here and staked my claim. Do you ever regret it? It must be lonely sometimes." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "It was lonely, less so lately." The air between them seemed to thicken, becoming charged with something Beatrice did not quite know how to name. She looked away, her heart beating faster. "Tell me about teaching," Raleigh said after a moment, his voice carefully neutral. "Did you enjoy it?" "I loved it." The memory made her smile despite the sadness that came with it. There is something magical about watching a child's face light up when they finally understand something, when the letters suddenly form words and the words form meaning. "I taught children from 6 to 14, all in one room. It was chaotic and exhausting and wonderful." "Why did you stop?" The smile faded. "My mother got sick. I needed to care for her. By the time she died, my father had already started gambling heavily, and the school board did not want to employ the daughter of the town drunk. They found someone else. That was unfair. Life is often unfair." She kept her voice level, though the injustice still stung. "I should have left Concordia then, should have gone to another town and found a new teaching position. But I kept hoping my father would recover himself, would become the man he used to be. I stayed too long, and by the time I realized he was not going to change, it was too late. His debts had caught up with us." Raleigh was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know, there is no school between here and Concordia. The nearest is in town, too far for most ranch children to attend. The families out here teach their own children if they can, but many lack the education to do so effectively. Have you thought about teaching again?" She looked at him in surprise. "How would that work?" "Start small. There are 6 families within a 10-mile radius who have school-age children. Talk to them. See if they would be interested in sending their children to a school held at the York Ranch, say 3 days a week. I have a storage building that could be converted into a schoolroom without much effort." Hope flickered in Beatrice's chest, fragile and bright. "Do you really think people would be interested?" "I know they would." Bess Carter was just complaining last week that her youngest is 12 and barely knows his letters because she never learned to read properly herself. And Jim Morrison's girls are sharp as tacks, but getting no proper education stuck out on their ranch. You would truly let me do this? Use your building, organize a school, Beatrice. He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious. I told you when you arrived that you are not a servant here. You are free to do whatever you wish with your time and your talents. If you want to teach, then teach. If you want to leave and go to another town and start over somewhere no one knows your history, I will give you money for travel and references that will open doors. You are not obligated to stay here. The thought of leaving sent an unexpected pang through her chest. When had this place started feeling like home? When had this man become someone she looked forward to seeing each morning, someone whose opinion mattered to her, whose presence brought her comfort and something else, something warmer and more complicated? I do not want to leave, she said quietly. I like it here. Something shifted in his expression, a warmth entering his eyes that made her breath catch. I am glad. I would miss you if you left. The moment stretched between them, loaded with unspoken feelings. Then Raleigh cleared his throat and stood, breaking the spell. I should turn in, early day tomorrow, but think about the school idea. I meant what I said. I will. Good night, Raleigh. Good night, Beatrice. She watched him climb the stairs, then sat staring into the fire for a long time after, her heart full of confused emotions. She was drawn to Raleigh York in ways that frightened her. He was kind and honorable and handsome, and she found herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering what his hands would feel like on her skin, what his lips would taste like. It was madness. She had known him only a few weeks. She was living in his house because of a debt of honor, nothing more. He had given no indication that he saw her as anything other than a responsibility inherited from his past. And yet, sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression that made her think perhaps he felt something too. Perhaps she was not alone in this growing attraction. She shook her head, pushing the thoughts away. She could not afford to read too much into kindness. She had to focus on rebuilding her life, on finding purpose and independence. The school idea was perfect. It would give her a reason to stay, a way to contribute to the community, a path forward that did not depend on anyone else. The next week was a flurry of activity. Raleigh took her around to the neighboring ranches to discuss the school idea. The response was enthusiastic. Every family they visited was eager to send their children, and within days she had commitments for 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. The men began converting the storage building, installing a wood stove, building desks and benches, adding windows to let in more light. Beatrice rode into Concordia with Frietta to purchase supplies. She felt nervous returning to the town that had witnessed her humiliation, but people who had watched her auction now greeted her with respect. The shopkeeper, who had not spoken to her in months when she was her father's daughter, now fell over himself to help her, extending credit against Raleigh's account without question. She bought slates and chalk, primers and paper, ink and pens, a large wall map, and a beautiful globe that made her think of all the places she would teach her students about. As they loaded the packages into the wagon, she saw her father stumbling out of a saloon across the street. He looked terrible, thin and gray and dissolute. Their eyes met for a moment. Shame and anger warred in his expression, then he turned and disappeared into an alley without speaking to her. Beatrice felt a complicated mix of emotions: pity, anger, sadness, and beneath it all, relief that she was no longer trapped in the cage of his failures. "Are you all right, dear?" Frietta asked gently, touching her arm. "Yes, I am all right," and she was. She was more than all right. She was free and building a new life, and nothing her father did or did not do could touch her anymore. The school opened on a cold but sunny morning in late February. Beatrice stood at the door of the newly converted schoolroom, her heart pounding with excitement and nervousness as wagons and horses arrived carrying her students. They came bundled in coats and scarves, eyes wide and curious, parents grateful and hopeful. Raleigh had insisted on being there for the first day. He helped parents unload their children, shook hands, and made everyone feel welcome. When the last parent had departed, and 15 children sat at the desks looking at her expectantly, Beatrice felt a surge of joy so intense it almost brought tears to her eyes. "Good morning," she said, smiling at the sea of young faces. "My name is Miss Langford, and I am very happy to meet all of you. We are going to learn so many wonderful things together." And they did. Teaching in the schoolroom at the York Ranch was everything she had loved about her old position and more. The children were eager and bright, hungry for knowledge. She taught them reading and writing, mathematics and history, geography and natural science. She read them stories and poetry, taught them songs, encouraged them to ask questions and think critically. Raleigh often stopped by during his lunch break to see how things were going. He would lean against the doorframe, watching with a small smile as she taught, and something about his presence made her feel more confident, more capable. After school ended each day, she would tell him about funny things the children had said or breakthroughs they had made, and he would listen with genuine interest, asking questions and praising her work. "You are a natural teacher," he said one afternoon as they walked from the schoolhouse back to the ranch house. "Those children are lucky to have you. I am the lucky one." She hugged her books to her chest, the late afternoon sun warm on her face. "I had forgotten how much teaching fills me up, makes me feel purposeful. You glow when you talk about it. Your whole face lights up." She glanced at him, catching an expression of such warmth and admiration that it made her stumble slightly. He caught her elbow, steadying her, and the touch sent electricity up her arm. They both froze, standing close together on the path, his hand still on her arm, their eyes locked. "Beatrice," he said, his voice low and rough. "Yes, I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What?" He seemed to struggle with himself, then took a breath. "When I saw you on that auction block, I told you I bought your freedom because of a debt to your mother. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. When I looked at you standing there with snow in your hair, so brave and frightened and beautiful, something happened to me. Something I did not expect and did not fully understand. I told myself I was doing a good deed, repaying an old debt. But as these weeks have passed, as I have gotten to know you, I have realized the truth." "What truth?" she whispered, hardly daring to breathe. "I am falling in love with you." The words came out almost helplessly, as though pulled from somewhere deep inside him. "I know I have no right. I know the circumstances of how you came here were awful, and you might always associate me with that terrible day. I know I am just a rancher without much polish or sophistication, while you are educated and refined. But I cannot help how I feel. You make everything brighter, Beatrice. You make this house feel like a home. You make me want to be better than I am." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. "Raleigh, you are the best man I have ever known. You saved me from a fate I cannot bear to even contemplate. You have treated me with nothing but respect and kindness. You have given me back my purpose and my dignity. How could I not love you?" His eyes widened. "You love me. I do. I think I started falling in love with you that first day when you put your coat around my shoulders, when you looked at me like I was a person worth protecting. I have been trying not to feel it, trying to convince myself it was just gratitude or proximity, but it is more than that. It is everything." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hands. "May I kiss you, please?" she breathed. His lips met hers gently at first, tentative and sweet, then with growing passion as she responded. She dropped her books, not caring, as they tumbled to the ground, and wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing closer. He held her like she was precious, like she was everything, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the world seemed brighter somehow, more vivid and alive. "You will wear flowers in your hair," he said, touching the dark strands that had escaped from her bun. "Not snow, flowers, and you will be happy, I promise you that." "I am already happy," she whispered. "Right here, right now, with you." They stood wrapped in each other's arms as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Beatrice felt like her heart might burst from the sheer joy of it, the miracle of finding love in the midst of such darkness, of being saved not just from physical danger, but from spiritual despair. That evening at dinner, with Ezra sitting across the table trying unsuccessfully to hide a knowing grin, Raleigh cleared his throat formally. "Ezra, I wanted you to be the first to know. I have asked Beatrice to marry me, and she has agreed." Ezra laughed, slapping the table. "About time, boy. I have been watching you two dance around each other for weeks, wondering when you would both come to your senses. Congratulations to you both." "We are not rushing anything," Beatrice said, though she could not stop smiling. "I want to finish out the school term, and we need time to plan properly." "Take all the time you need," Raleigh said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I have waited my whole life for you. A few more months will not kill me." But those months flew by like they had wings. Spring came to Kansas in a riot of green and color, the prairie transforming from white and brown to a carpet of wildflowers. Beatrice continued teaching, her students thriving and growing. Word spread about the successful school at the York Ranch, and more families inquired about enrollment for the following term. Raleigh and Beatrice spent every possible moment together, getting to know each other more deeply, planning their future. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their hopes. She learned about the loneliness of his teenage years, the way he had built himself up from nothing through sheer determination. He learned about her mother's wisdom and kindness, about her father's slow decline, about the books she loved and the places she dreamed of seeing. They rode out together across the prairie, watching the sun rise and set over the endless land. He taught her more about ranching and horses, and she shared her knowledge of literature and history. They were different in many ways but complemented each other perfectly, each making the other stronger and more complete. In May, with wildflowers covering every available surface and the whole community invited, they married in the ranch house living room. Beatrice wore a simple white dress that Frietta had helped her sew, and true to Raleigh's promise, her dark hair was crowned with a wreath of prairie flowers. Golden black-eyed Susans, purple coneflowers, white daisies, and blue wild indigo. She looked nothing like the frightened woman who had stood on an auction block with snow in her hair. She looked radiant, loved, and utterly happy. The circuit preacher, a kind man named Reverend Walsh, who rode between settlements performing marriages and baptisms and funerals, conducted the ceremony. Raleigh looked impossibly handsome in a new black suit, his dark hair carefully combed, his gray eyes never leaving her face as they exchanged vows. "I, Raleigh York, take you, Beatrice Langford, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and cherish you for as long as we both shall live. You brought light into my life when I did not even know I was living in darkness. You are my partner, my equal, my love, and my home." Beatrice's voice shook with emotion as she responded. "I, Beatrice Langford, take you, Raleigh York, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, support you, and cherish you for as long as we both shall live. You saved me from despair and gave me back my life. You are my refuge, my champion, my love, and my future." When Reverend Walsh pronounced them man and wife and Raleigh kissed her, the small crowd cheered. Beatrice felt tears of pure joy streaming down her face. Who could have imagined, 4 short months ago, that she would find herself here? Married to a good man, surrounded by friends, with a purpose and a future stretching bright before her. The celebration lasted long into the evening, with music and dancing and food enough to feed twice the number of guests. The ranch hands pulled out fiddles and harmonicas, and someone produced a guitar. Raleigh spun Beatrice around the makeshift dance floor, both of them laughing breathlessly, and she thought she had never been happier. Later, much later, when the guests had finally departed and the house was quiet, Raleigh carried her up the stairs to their bedroom. He set her down gently, reverently, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly, tucking a flower-wreathed strand of hair behind her ear. "A little," she admitted. "Are you terrified?" he said with a small laugh. "I want everything to be perfect for you." She reached up and cupped his face, feeling the slight rasp of stubble against her palms. "It already is perfect. You are perfect. We are perfect together." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and she lost herself in the sensation of his mouth on hers, his hands gentle but urgent as they moved over her body. He undid the buttons of her dress slowly, reverently, as though unwrapping a precious gift. She helped him out of his jacket and shirt, marveling at the strength in his shoulders, the warmth of his skin. Their coming together was tender and passionate, awkward in moments but beautiful overall. He was patient with her inexperience, attentive to her responses, making sure she felt pleasure before seeking his own. When it was over, they lay tangled together, breathless and overwhelmed, and Beatrice understood in her bones that she was exactly where she was meant to be. "I love you, Mrs. York," Raleigh whispered against her hair. "I love you, Mr. York," she whispered back, smiling at the newness of her married name. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Beatrice's life. She continued teaching through the summer, watching her students progress and grow. In the fall, enrollment doubled as word continued to spread about the quality of education available at the York Ranch School. She hired an assistant teacher, a young woman named Emma, who had recently arrived from Ohio with teaching credentials and a desire for adventure. The ranch prospered under Raleigh's management. He expanded the herd, bought more land, and developed a reputation for breeding some of the finest horses in Kansas. He was respected in the community, known as a fair dealer and a man of his word. Beatrice was proud to be his wife, proud to stand beside him at community gatherings and cattle auctions and church socials. Their marriage deepened and strengthened as they learned each other's rhythms, as they weathered the inevitable small conflicts and misunderstandings that all couples face and came out stronger on the other side. Raleigh was not perfect. He could be stubborn and single-minded when he got an idea in his head, and he sometimes worked himself to exhaustion without asking for help. Beatrice had her own flaws, a tendency toward anxiety, a perfectionist streak that made her harder on herself than necessary, a lingering insecurity about her worth that sometimes flared up unexpectedly. But they loved each other through the imperfections. They learned to communicate, to compromise, to support each other's dreams while building a shared life. They laughed together and argued and made up. They worked side by side and played together. They built a life that was not always easy but was deeply good. In the spring of 1869, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of joy and terror. She had lost her own mother, knew the dangers of childbirth, feared leaving Raleigh alone if something went wrong. But she also felt a deep, primal excitement about bringing a child into the world, about creating a family with the man she loved. When she told Raleigh, he picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down carefully as though she might break. "Are you happy?" he asked, his hands cupping her face, his eyes searching hers. "I am happy," she said, meaning it, "and scared. I am scared too, but we will face it together like we face everything. And Dr. Harrison is a good man. He will take excellent care of you." The pregnancy progressed normally, though Beatrice struggled with nausea in the early months and found teaching increasingly tiring as her belly grew. She handed more responsibilities to Emma, trusting her assistant to manage the day-to-day operations of the school while she focused on preparing for the baby. Frietta and the neighboring ranch women surrounded her with advice and support, some helpful and some contradictory, but all well-meaning. They threw her a small party and gave her baby clothes and blankets, hand-sewn and soft. Raleigh built a beautiful cradle from oak wood, carving small horses into the headboard, working on it in the evenings with focused concentration. In October, as the leaves turned gold and red, Beatrice went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Dr. Harrison stayed with her the whole time, monitoring her progress, offering encouragement. Raleigh held her hand, his face drawn with worry, murmuring words of love and support even as she squeezed his fingers hard enough to bruise. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their son was born, small and red and screaming with indignation. Dr. Harrison placed him on Beatrice's chest, and she looked down at the tiny face, the dark hair, the little fists waving in fury, and felt a love so intense it took her breath away. "He is perfect," Raleigh said, his voice choked with emotion, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "You are amazing. I love you so much." They named him Robert, and he became the center of their world. Beatrice had worried that motherhood might feel like a loss of the independence she had fought so hard to reclaim. But instead, it felt like an expansion of her heart, a new dimension of love and purpose. She managed to balance caring for Robert with continuing to oversee the school, though she cut back her direct teaching hours. Raleigh was a devoted father, involved in every aspect of Robert's care in a way that some men would have considered beneath them. He changed diapers and walked the floor with a crying baby and sang lullabies in his deep, slightly off-key voice. He looked at his son with wonder, as though unable to quite believe this miracle they had created. The years flowed on, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the seasons of the prairie. Robert grew into a sturdy, curious toddler, then a bright, active little boy who loved horses and books in equal measure. The school continued to thrive, eventually expanding to include an advanced program for older students who wanted to prepare for college or teaching careers of their own. In 1872, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Ruth. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes, and from the beginning showed a fierce independence and stubbornness that made both parents laugh even as it challenged them. Robert was devoted to his little sister, protective and patient even when she got into his things, or followed him around demanding to be included in his games. The ranch continued to grow. Raleigh bought out a neighboring property when the owner died without heirs, adding another 300 acres to their land. He built a larger barn and upgraded the bunkhouse. The York Ranch became one of the most successful in the region, and with success came respect and influence. Beatrice found herself becoming a leader in the community, not just as a teacher, but as someone people came to for advice and mediation. She organized a women's group that advocated for better schools and libraries in the region. She served on the board of the newly established hospital in Concordia. She used her position and her voice to make things better for others, especially women and children who lacked power or resources. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would think back to that terrible day on the auction block, the snow in her hair, the cold and the fear and the humiliation. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like something that had happened to a different person. In a way, it had. That frightened girl had transformed into a confident woman, wife, mother, teacher, and community leader. Not despite the trauma, but in some complex way because of it, because she had survived it and built something beautiful from the ashes. "What are you thinking about?" Raleigh asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, their children playing in the yard before them. "How far we have come," she said, leaning into his solid warmth. "How different life is now from what I feared it would be." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I thank God every day that I happened to be in Concordia that December, that I heard your name and recognized it, that I had the money to buy your freedom. When I think about what might have happened to you otherwise, do not," she interrupted gently. "It did not happen. You saved me and we built this life together. That is what matters." "You saved yourself," he corrected. "I just gave you the opportunity. Everything else you did through your own strength and courage and brilliance." She smiled, kissing his jaw. "We saved each other. I think that is how the best love works." In 1875, their third child was born, another son they named Samuel. He was a calm, easygoing baby who seemed content to observe the chaos of family life with mild interest, so different from Robert's intense curiosity and Ruth's fierce determination. The children filled the ranch house with noise and laughter, and the occasional tears, and Beatrice could not imagine life without them. The school had become an institution now, with 3 teachers including Emma and enrollment exceeding 50 students. They had built a proper schoolhouse, larger and better equipped, though it was still on York Ranch land. There was talk of incorporating as an official district school, which would bring government funding and recognition. Beatrice served as the school's principal and head teacher, though she spent less time in direct instruction as administrative duties increased. She loved watching the children she had taught grow up, some of them now becoming teachers themselves, carrying forward her belief in the transformative power of education. Life was not without its challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers that threatened the cattle. There were illnesses and injuries, like when Robert broke his arm falling from a horse, or when Ruth caught pneumonia and they spent terrifying weeks nursing her through fever. There were difficult decisions about the ranch and the school, conflicts with difficult neighbors, and the ongoing struggle of balancing work and family. But through it all, Beatrice and Raleigh faced everything as partners. Their love had matured from the passionate, all-consuming fire of early marriage into something deeper and steadier, a love built on respect and trust and shared history. They knew each other's strengths and weaknesses, knew how to comfort and challenge each other, knew that they were stronger together than they could ever be apart. One afternoon in the summer of 1877, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Beatrice was in the garden with Ruth, teaching her daughter how to identify herbs, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. She looked up to see a man dismounting at the front porch where Raleigh stood speaking with Ezra. Something about the man's posture was familiar. As he turned, she caught a glimpse of his face and felt her stomach drop. It was her father. He looked old, far older than his years, his face marked by dissipation and hard living. But he was sober, or appeared to be, and the way he held himself suggested a humility she had never seen in him before. "Papa," she said, approaching slowly, Ruth's small hand clutched tight in hers. "Beatrice." Her father's voice cracked. "You look well, healthy, happy." "I am all of those things. What brings you here?" He glanced at Raleigh, who had moved to stand beside Beatrice, a protective presence. "I heard you had married, had children. I heard you started a school that is the best in the county. I heard you built a good life." "I did. No thanks to you." The words were harsh, but she felt she had earned the right to speak them. This man had sold her like property to pay his debts. Whatever had brought him here, she did not owe him kindness. "You are right," he said to her surprise. "I failed you, Beatrice. I failed your mother's memory and everything she believed in. I destroyed everything good in my life because I was weak and selfish. I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not deserve forgiveness. But I needed to see you, to tell you I am sorry, and to tell you that I am glad you escaped the fate I tried to put you in." Beatrice studied him for a long moment. She had imagined this confrontation many times over the years, had rehearsed angry speeches and cutting remarks. But now, faced with the reality of her father's broken form, she found that most of her anger had burned away, leaving only a kind of sad pity. "Thank you for the apology," she said finally. "I cannot say I forgive you, not yet, maybe not ever. What you did was unforgivable. But I can say that I hope you find some peace in your life, some way to make amends for your mistakes. That is more grace than I deserve." He looked at Ruth, who was peeking out from behind her mother's skirt. "Is this your daughter?" "Yes." "Ruth, this is your grandfather, though you will not remember meeting him." Ruth studied him with the unnerving directness of childhood. "You made Mama sad." "I did. I made many people sad. I am trying to be better now." "Well, you should keep trying," Ruth declared, then tugged on Beatrice's hand. "Can we go back to the garden, Mama? I want to find more mint." Despite everything, Beatrice felt her lips twitch with the desire to smile at her daughter's forthright nature. "In a moment, sweetheart." Her father nodded, accepting the dismissal. "I should go. I am living in town now, working at the lumber yard, staying sober. If you ever decide you want to talk to me, you know where to find me, but I will not impose on you. I have done enough damage." He mounted his horse and rode away, and Beatrice watched him go with complicated feelings. Raleigh put his arm around her waist. "Are you all right?" "I do not know. I think so." "It is strange. I thought I would feel angrier, but mostly I just feel sad for him. He has nothing and nobody, and it is his own fault, but that does not make it less tragic." "You are generous to see it that way. He does not deserve your compassion." "Maybe not. But holding on to anger only hurts me, not him. I can let it go and still protect myself from being hurt again. Those things are not mutually exclusive." Over the following months, Beatrice saw her father occasionally in town. He seemed to be making a genuine effort to rebuild his life, staying sober, working steadily, attending church. She never invited him to the ranch, but she sometimes stopped to speak with him briefly when their paths crossed. It was not reconciliation, exactly, but it was a kind of peace. Ruth grew into a spirited young girl who wanted to be a cowhand like her father, much to everyone's amusement and occasional consternation. Robert showed academic brilliance, devouring every book he could get his hands on and asking questions that sometimes stumped even Beatrice. Samuel remained the calm center of family storms, peacemaker and observer. In 1880, Beatrice realized with shock that she had been married to Raleigh for more than a decade. How had time passed so quickly? It seemed like just yesterday she had stood on that auction block, and yet here she was, a woman of 34 with 3 children and a full life. That evening, after the children were in bed, she and Raleigh sat on the porch as they often did, watching stars emerge in the deepening blue sky. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" she asked, taking his hand. About the snow in my hair. I remember everything about that day. I said you would wear flowers instead, that you would be happy. You kept your promise. You have made me happier than I ever imagined possible. He brought her hand to his lips. You make every day better, Beatrice. Every single day. I was half alive before you came into my life. Now I am fully living. We should do something special for our anniversary next May. 10 years is significant. What would you like? I will give you anything in my power to give. She thought for a moment. I would like to take the children on a trip, maybe to Denver or Kansas City. Let them see a real city, visit museums and theaters. Show them there is a world beyond the prairie. That sounds perfect. We will do it. And they did, taking a month-long trip the following summer that became one of the highlights of their children's childhoods. They rode the train, stayed in hotels, visited everything from art museums to zoos. The children's eyes grew wide at the size and bustle of the cities, the sheer number of people and buildings and experiences. But Beatrice noticed that they also seemed relieved to return home, to the open spaces and familiar rhythms of ranch life. She understood. The prairie had claimed her heart too. For all its hardships, there was a peace and freedom in the wide open spaces that no city could match. The years continued their steady march. The school celebrated its 15th anniversary with a huge community gathering, former students returning from all over the region to honor the institution that had shaped their lives. Beatrice stood before the crowd, looking at the faces of children she had taught who were now adults with children of their own, and felt profoundly grateful for the opportunity to make such a difference. Raleigh surprised her by standing up and making a speech. He was not a man comfortable with public speaking, but his words rang with sincerity. Most of you know that my wife came into my life under difficult circumstances. What you may not know is that, from the first moment I met her, I recognized something special. She had been brought low by circumstances beyond her control, but she never lost her dignity, her strength, or her determination to build something meaningful with her life. This school is a testament to that strength. Beatrice York has shaped more young minds and changed more lives than can possibly be measured. But even more than that, she has been my partner, my love, and my inspiration. Everything good in my life flows from the day I met her. Beatrice felt tears streaming down her face as the crowd applauded. Their children, now teenagers and a pre-teen, looked embarrassed and proud in equal measure. This was her life, these were her people, and it was more than she had ever dared to dream. In 1885, Robert left for college in the East, heading to a prestigious university to study law. Saying goodbye to her firstborn was one of the hardest things Beatrice had ever done, but she was also fiercely proud. Her son had opportunities she could never have imagined at his age. Ruth showed no interest in college, instead apprenticing herself to a renowned horse breeder in Missouri. She wrote letters filled with technical details about breeding lines and training techniques, and Beatrice could hear her daughter's passion in every word. Samuel, now a thoughtful boy of 10, seemed destined to stay close to home, already talking about taking over the ranch from his father someday. In the spring of 1887, Beatrice received word that her father had died. He had been kicked by a horse at the lumber yard and never recovered. She went to his funeral, one of only a handful of people there, and felt a complicated grief. He had never fully redeemed himself, never become the father she needed, but he had tried in his last years to be better. That had to count for something. Going through his possessions afterward, she found a small wooden box containing letters he had written but never sent to her. In them, he expressed remorse and pride, apologizing over and over for his failures while marveling at her accomplishments. The last letter, dated just a week before his death, said simply, Your mother would be so proud of you. I am proud of you too, even though I have no right to be. You became everything good despite me, not because of me. That is your triumph." She cried, reading those words, mourning not the father he had been, but the father he might have been if he had been stronger, better. Raleigh held her while she wept, offering silent comfort and understanding. Time continued its relentless forward motion. Robert graduated from law school and opened a practice in Kansas City, representing farmers and small business people who could not afford fancy attorneys. Ruth married her horse breeder mentor's son and moved to Missouri, starting a breeding operation of her own. Samuel took over more and more of the ranch operations as Raleigh entered his 50s, though the old cowboy showed no signs of slowing down. The school celebrated its 20th anniversary, then its 25th. Beatrice trained new teachers, always looking for that combination of knowledge and passion that made for truly great educators. She watched generations of children grow up, saw them become parents themselves, saw them build lives and contribute to their communities. In 1895, Robert returned home with news. He had been elected to the state legislature. Beatrice and Raleigh traveled to Topeka for his swearing-in, watching their son take the oath of office with tears in their eyes. He was going to work for education reform and farmers' rights, carrying forward the values they had instilled in him. That same year, Ruth made them grandparents for the first time, giving birth to a daughter she named Margaret, after the grandmother she had never met. Holding that tiny baby, Beatrice thought about the chain of kindness and courage that had led to this moment. Her mother standing up for a stranger, that stranger years later rescuing her daughter, that daughter building a life and a family, creating new life and new possibilities. "What are you thinking?" Raleigh asked, watching her cradle their granddaughter. "That goodness ripples out in ways we can never fully see or understand. Your life was saved, which saved mine, which created our children, which created this beautiful little girl." Acts of courage and kindness echo through time. "Your mother started it all," Raleigh said softly. "She was brave enough to speak up when silence would have been easier. Everything good in my life, in your life, in our children's lives, traces back to that moment." Beatrice looked down at the baby in her arms, at her daughter glowing with new motherhood, at her husband whose love had been constant for nearly 30 years, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. The turn of the century found them still on the ranch, though Samuel had officially taken over as primary manager. Raleigh was 61 now, his dark hair gone silver, his face weathered by decades under the sun. But his gray eyes were as sharp as ever, and he still rode every day, checking on the horses and cattle he loved. Beatrice was 54, her own hair streaked with gray, her body softer and slower than it had once been. But she felt vibrantly alive, still teaching a few classes at the school she had founded, still active in community affairs, still deeply in love with her husband. They had 6 grandchildren now, ranging from baby James to 7-year-old Margaret, and every one of them was a joy. The ranch house that had once seemed so spacious was crammed full during family visits, children and grandchildren spilling out onto the porch and yard, filling the air with laughter and noise. One evening, Raleigh and Beatrice walked down to their favorite spot by the creek that ran through the property. The cottonwood trees were dressed in autumn gold, and the air had that particular clarity that comes with October. They sat on the bank, watching the water flow past, comfortable in the silence of long companionship. "You ever regret it?" Beatrice asked suddenly. "Spending all that money to buy my freedom, you could have used it to expand the ranch faster, to build an empire." Raleigh laughed, the sound warm and rich. "An empire means nothing without someone to share it with. That money was the best investment I ever made. It bought me a partner, a love, a family, and a life richer than any amount of land or cattle could provide. I love you, she said simply. After all these years, after everything we have been through, I love you more than I did on our wedding day. That is how it is supposed to work, he said, kissing her temple. Love that lasts is not static. It grows and deepens, and becomes something neither person could have imagined at the beginning. As they sat there, watching the sun set over the prairie they had made home, Beatrice thought about that terrified girl on the auction block, snow in her hair and despair in her heart. She wished she could go back and tell that girl what was coming. Tell her that the cowboy who bought her freedom would give her so much more than that she would know love and purpose and joy beyond measure. But maybe not knowing was part of the beauty. Maybe the journey from despair to happiness, from fear to love, was more meaningful because she had not known it was coming. She had survived and rebuilt and thrived, and every good thing in her life was sweeter because she understood how easily it could have gone another way. Years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of an ordinary but extraordinary life. More grandchildren arrived, bringing the total to 9. Robert became a state senator, pushing through education reforms that improved schools across Kansas. Ruth's horse breeding operation became renowned throughout the region, her stock prized for their intelligence and endurance. Samuel married a schoolteacher named Lily, and they lived in the ranch house, caring for the land and the legacy their parents had built. Raleigh's health began to decline in his early 70s, his joints stiff with arthritis, his breathing sometimes labored. But his spirit remained strong, his love for Beatrice undiminished. They spent their days in quiet companionship, reading together, talking about memories, watching their grandchildren play. On a spring morning in 1907, 40 years after their wedding day, Beatrice woke to find Raleigh looking at her with such tenderness it took her breath away. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, his voice rough with age but warm with affection. "Good morning, my love. What has you looking at me like that? I was just thinking about how grateful I am. 40 years ago today, you agreed to become my wife. You have been the center of my world ever since." She smiled, reaching for his hand, feeling the familiar calluses and scars, the warmth and strength still there despite the ravages of time. "We should celebrate. Have the family over for dinner." That sounds perfect, but when she tried to get up, he did not follow. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just tired. I think I will rest a bit longer." Something about his voice made her pause, made her look at him more closely. His color was off, his breathing shallow. "Raleigh, I love you, Beatrice. I want you to know that. Every day with you has been a gift." Fear clutched at her heart. "You are scaring me. Let me get the doctor." "No doctor." His grip tightened on her hand. "Just stay with me. Talk to me. Tell me about that first winter, about teaching." She understood then what was happening, felt the knowledge settle into her bones with terrible certainty. But she did what he asked, lying back down beside him, holding his hand, talking about the school and their children and the life they had built together. "You kept your promise," she whispered as his breathing grew more labored. "I wore flowers instead of snow. You made me so happy." "You made me whole," he breathed. "Love of my life. My Beatrice." His eyes closed and his breathing stopped, and she felt the moment his spirit left, felt the absence like a physical pain. She lay there beside him, holding his hand, tears streaming down her face, feeling like half of herself had been torn away. Samuel found them an hour later, mother and father lying together, one alive and one gone, still holding hands. He helped her up gently, tears streaming down his own face, and held her while she wept. The funeral was huge, befitting a man who had been respected and loved throughout the community. But Beatrice barely registered the faces or the words of sympathy. She moved through the days following Raleigh's death in a fog of grief, going through the motions because people expected it but feeling hollow inside. Her children stayed close, worried about her. Ruth, in particular, seemed determined not to leave her mother alone. "Mama, you cannot sit in this house grieving forever," she said gently one evening a week after the funeral. "Papa would not want that, I know, but I do not know how to be in the world without him. We were together for 40 years, Ruth. He was part of me. He still is. He always will be. But you have to keep living. You have so much more to give." Slowly, painfully, Beatrice began to re-engage with life. She returned to the school, throwing herself into her work. She spent time with her grandchildren, finding comfort in their innocent joy. She rode out onto the prairie on quiet mornings, talking to Raleigh as though he could hear her, telling him about her days, sharing her grief and her memories. The pain never fully went away, but it became more bearable. She learned to carry it, to integrate it into her daily existence. She found joy again in small things. A grandchild's laugh, a beautiful sunset, a good book, the smell of prairie flowers. On the anniversary of Raleigh's death, she rode out to their spot by the creek and wove a crown of wildflowers, the same mix she had worn on their wedding day. Black-eyed Susans, coneflowers, daisies, and wild indigo. She placed it on the water and watched it float downstream, a tribute and a prayer. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me on that terrible day. Thank you for the coat and the kindness and the love. Thank you for 40 years of happiness. Thank you for believing I could be more than a debt servant, more than my father's shame. You gave me everything." The wind rustled through the cottonwoods, and for a moment she could almost feel his presence, almost hear his voice saying what he had said so many times over their years together. "You gave me everything too." She lived another 12 years, remaining active and engaged until the end. She saw the school expand again, saw indoor plumbing and electricity come to the ranch, saw her grandchildren grow up and start families of their own. She published a memoir about frontier education that became required reading in teacher training programs throughout the Midwest. She advocated for women's suffrage and lived to see the 19th Amendment pass, crying with joy when women finally won the right to vote. On a warm June evening in 1919, at the age of 73, Beatrice York passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She was laid to rest beside Raleigh under a cottonwood tree on the ranch they had built together, her grave marked with a simple stone that read, "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and teacher." She wore flowers instead of snow. At the funeral, Robert stood before the crowd and told the story many had heard but never tired of hearing. How a young cowboy had bought a frightened woman's freedom with snow in her hair, how he had promised she would wear flowers instead, how that promise had been kept not just on their wedding day but every day of their life together. "My parents' love story started with an act of kindness that echoed across generations," Robert said, his voice strong despite his tears. "My grandmother saved a stranger's life in Colorado. That stranger, my father, saved my mother's life in Kansas. My mother then dedicated her life to educating hundreds of children, including her own, setting them on paths to do good in the world. That is the power of choosing kindness over cruelty, of seeing the humanity in others, of believing that we can make things better." The school that bore her name continued to thrive, eventually growing into a full K-12 institution that served the region for another 60 years. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, each new steward honoring the legacy of hard work and integrity that Raleigh and Beatrice had established.